Alright, hello everyone. Today's lesson we're going to look at how President Hoover responded to the Great Depression. So our objectives and standards: to summarize the main beliefs of Herbert Hoover in government, and to infer why people blamed Hoover for the problems in the country. Okay, and we also have our standards here as well if you'd like to take a look at them. Our vocabulary preview. This word wasn't really part of the lesson, but I threw it in here because I think it's important to know what philosophy is, and some of you may know what it means already or may have heard of it, but I just want to go over it as well. Okay, so think about this. When the stock market crashed, President Herbert Hoover stated that any lack of confidence in the economic future is foolish. So what do you think he meant by this, and what does this imply about his view of government involvement in the crisis that was going on? And our essential question: what were Hoover's beliefs and philosophy of the economic crisis? Okay, so to help reassure the country. So after the stock market crashed, Hoover tried to tell Americans to remain calm and hopeful. Um, it was known that the business cycle can go through, ups and downs, and hard economic times were part of the business cycle, and that things would eventually recover. There was also a philosophy or a certain way of thinking by Hoover and others, including basic Americans, that we're tough, we can get through anything, we don't need anybody's help. So with that said, Hoover believed that charities and local organizations should help those who were suffering in the Great Depression instead of the government. Hoover didn't believe it was the government's role to step in and be a charity. Okay, Americans also believed that they should take care of themselves and kind of pick themselves up by their bootstraps. Have you ever heard that saying? Kind of pick themselves up, and if they need help, they should figure it out themselves. It wasn't the job of the government. So there's this philosophy by the president and the government, and also by Americans, that things aren't so great right now, but we'll get through it. We can get through it. So with that said, Hoover is going to oppose really any federal assistance for those who needed it. But he is going to take careful steps to kind of help resolve the financial crisis. Obviously, he knows things aren't great with the economy, so he's going to take small steps to try and fix it. He called together the leaders of banking and business and labor, and he calls them together, and he basically says to them, listen, there's a couple of things I want you to do. He asked them not to lay off any workers, obviously because hard economic times were going on, and he also asked for labor unions to make sure laborers didn't go on strike, so that wouldn't hurt the economy anymore. And he thinks this is the right decision. He thinks this is going to fix the problem. But after a year or so, the economy was still shrinking and people were still suffering. So these careful steps that he's taking don't really make a difference in a recovery for the economy. One little side note here, and it has to do with the economy as well, and we'll talk about this more in live class, but building the Boulder Dam. Before he was president, Hoover was Secretary of Commerce, like we had discussed, and he had received approval for the construction of a dam on the Colorado River. Now, construction began in 1929, about a little after a year after Hoover became president, and it's going to become known as the Boulder Dam. Now, it will later be known as the Hoover Dam, and you may have heard of this before, of the Hoover Dam before. So originally it was called the Boulder Dam, and it will be called the Hoover Dam. But the main point of this is that it will provide electrical power and flood control and water supply to agriculture in the western part of the United States. Okay, so here's a picture of a map that shows you where the Boulder Dam, now known as the Hoover Dam, is located. And I have a picture down here of construction being done on the dam. And like I said, we'll talk more about the Hoover Dam in live class. Okay, so the 1930 elections. So remember that Americans had elected Hoover and Republicans um, based on the idea that, things were going well in the 1920s and we were under leadership of Republicans in the 1920s. So things had been really good economically for people in the 1920s under Republican presidents and leaders. So they, had reelected them. But after the stock market crashed and people begin to see that things aren't going better for them, they begin to grow tired of uh, the Republican Party. So with that said, they're going to elect Democrats who are going to take control of the House of Representatives, and Republicans are also going to lose power in the Senate. So there's this anti-Hoover sentiment that is going to spread throughout the country. People are going to become frustrated with, the president. They're saying, he's not doing anything, he's not making a difference, he doesn't really care about us. So people begin to see Hoover as kind of a heartless man instead of the true leader as they'd seen him as. And I don't want you to think that Hoover was heartless. Again, Hoover had this belief that a lot of people had that that they could get through this, that the government doesn't really need to get involved yet. Things will work itself out. All these types of beliefs that things will be okay. So I don't want you thinking that Hoover was this president who didn't care. He just had a different viewpoint of how to solve the problem. So unfortunately, hard times are going to begin. People begin to live in shanty towns or these little villages outside of cities, these little huts or homes, and they call them Hoovervilles as an insult to President Hoover because a lot of people may have lost their homes or their jobs. A lot of people go homeless, so they live in these little shanty towns. And in the picture here, you can see, um, and they call them Hoovervilles to kind of be as an insult to President Hoover. They also had other insult. Um, you know, names for different things going on at the times. Homeless people would sleep in use newspapers for blankets, and they would call them Hoover blankets or things like that. Okay, so just a lot of insults thrown at the president. So as I was saying, this is just the beginning of hard times for the American people. Um, and as we go through, you'll begin to see um, towards the end of this week and next week as well, especially the hard times Americans are going to face. Okay? All right, so just to kind of wrap it up, Hoover responds. Remember that President Hoover responds to the economic crisis with very little support for government intervention. And again, I had that stop sign there, don't panic. That was his whole idea of everybody just remain calm, things will work its way out, everything will be okay. Americans and Hoover and a lot of people in the government believe that that the government doesn't need to get involved. That if you do need help, that you should go to a charity or an organization for help. Um, but Americans are going to begin to suffer. People begin to lose their jobs and their homes, and they're starting to face hard times. Like I said, within the next week or so, we'll begin to see what those hard times were and how this Great Depression really is a very tough time for people in this country. Okay, so that's all I have for this lesson. So please make sure you do the questions, and I will talk to you later.